You know, we human beings are curious creatures. We come into this world effortlessly, without study, without practice, without the slightest intention of being born, and yet the older we grow, the more convinced we become that everything meaningful must be achieved through strain. We imagine life as an obstacle course, a mountain to be climbed, a riddle to be solved by the clever and the strong. But if you listen closely, if you watch the trees sway in the wind or the rivers curve around stones, you'll notice something astonishing. Nothing in nature tries to be what it already is. And so, when I speak of the art of effortless living, I'm not suggesting a technique, a discipline, or a secret you must master. In fact, the moment you try to learn it, the moment you make it into a project, it slips right through your fingers. It's a bit like trying to hold water in a clenched fist. The tighter you grip, the less you have. Effortless living is never learned, because it cannot be taught, it can only be remembered. For there was a time before you were taught to be somebody, before you were asked to justify your existence, before you learned to measure your worth, when you lived entirely in this way. As a child, you breathed without thinking, laughed without reason, played without purpose. You didn't wake in the morning wondering how to be yourself, you simply were. And so the art we're speaking of is not the acquiring of anything new, but the shedding of what was added later, the unnecessary tension, the self-conscious grasping, the notion that life must be controlled like a wild horse. Have you ever watched a wild horse? It doesn't gallop by discipline or command. It runs because running is its nature, because movement is joy, and life is much the same. When you stop trying to force it, life begins to move of its own accord, beautifully, unpredictably, like a dance nobody choreographed yet everyone knows by heart. But of course we resist this. We resist because we've been conditioned to believe that ease is laziness, that simplicity is childish, that spontaneity is irresponsible. We have built systems and stories and identities around the idea that to live properly is to strive endlessly, to improve constantly, to attend to the future with grim determination. And so we tense our bodies, tighten our minds, and call the resulting anxiety being responsible. Imagine for a moment that you're floating in the sea. The waves lift you gently, rocking you like the cradle of the world. Now imagine suddenly deciding that floating is not enough, that you must improve your floating, so you begin to thrash your arms, stiffen your legs, clench your jaw. You sink, not because the sea has betrayed you, but because you've interfered with what was already working. Life is like the sea. It supports you naturally if you stop fighting it. But what does this actually mean in the living of your daily life? It means noticing when you are forcing, when you are striving, when you are trying so terribly hard to make things go your way. It means observing how much of your stress comes not from events themselves, but from your resistance to them. A conversation becomes difficult because you're trying to impress. A task becomes exhausting because you're trying to be perfect. A decision becomes crippling because you're trying to eliminate all uncertainty. But uncertainty is the very nature of existence. Without it, life would be a stagnant pond rather than a flowing river. Effortless living is not the absence of movement. It is movement without unnecessary tension. It is action that arises as naturally as breath. Think of a skilled musician improvising. They are not calculating each note with intense concentration. They are not worrying whether the audience will approve. Something flows through them, something beyond intention, beyond control. And that something is what we might call the effortless intelligence of life. You have felt this before. You have had moments, perhaps rare but unforgettable, when everything felt strangely simple. When words came without hesitation, when steps aligned without planning, when solutions appeared without strain. In those moments you were not pushing, you were allowing, you were not directing life like a conductor, you were being played like an instrument. And perhaps the great joke of it all is that we imagine effortless living to be the result of enlightenment, wisdom, or deep spiritual attainment. But no, the truth is far more playful. Effortless living is the state in which you stop trying to be enlightened, stop trying to be wise, stop trying to be spiritual at all. Because all these attempts are forms of grasping, and grasping is precisely what blocks the flow. So then you may ask, how do I stop grasping? But do you see the trick hidden in the question? Because the moment you seek a method, you are already grasping. The moment you try to let go, you are already holding on. It is like trying to relax by force. The very effort defeats the purpose. Effortless living begins not with an action, but with a seeing of the futility of struggle, a seeing of the way your mind tightens around ideas, fears, and expectations. And when you see this clearly, without judgment, without trying to fix anything, something remarkable happens. The tension begins to dissolve on its own, the way fog lifts when the sun rises. You don't make it happens because the conditions allow it. Imagine sitting at the edge of a forest at dusk. The birds quiet, the air cools, and gradually the sky deepens into night. You do not command the sun to set or the stars to appear. You simply witness the world shifting of its own accord. Effortless living is the same. It is witnessing yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, your impulses with the same openness, the same patience. And in that witnessing, something softens, something opens. life begins to breathe again. And so, the art of effortless living is not a skill to be mastered, but a remembering of your natural state. A state in which you allow life to unfold rather than demanding that it obey your design. A state in which you act not from fear or compulsion, but from the deep, intuitive rhythm of being itself. In the next movement of this exploration, let us venture deeper into this rhythm, into what it means to trust the intelligence of life, to surrender without passivity, and to live with a grace that is not achieved but revealed. Now, when we speak of trust, trusting life, trusting the flow, trusting the intelligence that moves through all things, many people imagine a passive surrender, a sort of limp resignation. But trust, in the sense I mean, is nothing of the kind. It is not the passivity of giving up, but the vitality of yielding. It is the trust of a blade of grass that bends in the wind so it does not break. Or the trust of a cat that leaps gracefully from a high ledge, certain that the ground will meet its paws with gentleness. Trust is an active openness, an alert allowing. You see, if effortless living were truly passive, it would collapse into inertia, lifeless and dull. But real effortless living is full of movement, energy, and spontaneity. It does not shrink from life, it participates fully. It laughs, it cries, it embraces, it stumbles. It is vivid, like a flame dancing without strain, never stiff, never self-conscious, always responding, always alive. But somewhere along the way, many of us lost this dance. We traded our natural spontaneity for technique, our intuition for strategy, our presence for the careful management of impressions. We began to consult the mind before every step, every word, every decision, as though the mind were a wise old master, rather than the chatterbox servant it truly is. Have you noticed how much of your effort is not directed at life itself, but at the maintenance of the self-image you carry around? You wake in the morning and immediately begin the task of being you, upholding the character, rehearsing the lines, polishing the mask. And by midday, you wonder why you feel so exhausted. It's not life that tires you, it's the performance. The art of effortless living begins when you become tired of the performance, when you begin to suspect that what you call being responsible is often just being afraid. Afraid of being judged, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being seen as you truly are. And so you strain, and you strive, and you push against life to maintain an illusion of control. But have you ever noticed what happens when you finally drop the act, even for a moment? Perhaps you were walking alone at night, or laughing with a friend, or lost in music, and something loosened, something unclenched. Suddenly you were simply there, without effort, without self-consciousness. And in that moment, life felt spacious again, beautifully open and startlingly simple. You weren't trying to live, you were living. These moments are not accidents. They are glimpses into your natural state, the state before thinking interferes, the state before the mind insists it must figure everything out. Let me give you an image. Imagine a man on a small boat drifting down a gentle river. At first, he tries to steer constantly, paddling left, then right, trying to force the boat to stay in the exact middle. He works up a sweat, he stresses, and yet the river continues to carry him wherever it likes. Finally, exhausted, he drops the paddle, and something extraordinary happens. The boat glides straight, effortlessly. Not because he is steering it, but because the river was never against him. Now, this does not mean that life always flows in the direction you expect. In fact, it rarely does, but it flows in the direction that belongs to you, the direction that reveals who you are when you stop interfering. When you begin to understand this, you start to see how absurd most of our striving truly is. We try to push the river, rearrange the stars, outsmart the wind. We plan and calculate and worry as though life were a puzzle that must be solved through superior intelligence. But life is not to be solved. Life is to be lived. And the moment you begin living, the puzzle dissolves on its own. Now you may ask, does this mean I should stop planning altogether? Should I abandon all goals, all responsibility? Not at all. A plan is like using a map when exploring a forest. It gives you a sense of direction, a reference point, a way of orienting yourself. But if you stare only at the map, terrified of straying, you will never smell the trees, feel the breeze, or hear the hidden streams. The plan becomes a cage instead of a guide. Effortless living is the art of holding your plans lightly, like a bird resting in your open palm. If it wishes to stay, it stays. If it wishes to fly, you do not close your fist. You allow life to breathe. And here is the deeper truth. Effortlessness is not the absence of effort, but the absence of strain. There is effort in playing the violin, in painting a mural, in running across a field. But when that effort arises naturally, from joy, from curiosity, from the sheer delight of movement, it does not exhaust you. On the contrary, it energizes you. It pulls you into the flow of life, where action and awareness merge into a seamless whole. Think of a dancer spinning across a stage. To the untrained eye, it looks effortless. But it is not without exertion. The dancer sweats, breathes hard, muscles burn. Yet there is no strain, no resistance. The dancer is not fighting the movement, they are moving with it. The effort is joy. The effort is freedom. Strain, on the other hand, is effort mixed with resistance, the body pulling one way while the mind pulls another. Strain is the conflict between what is happening and what you think should be happening, and that conflict is the true source of tension. Once you begin to see this distinction, your entire life softens. You stop forcing conversations. You stop pushing yourself into shapes that don't fit. You stop trying to be what you imagine others expect of you. You stop wrestling with life like an opponent and begin to dance with it like a partner. And the dance becomes easier the moment you realize that you do not need to lead. In fact, you cannot lead. The rhythm comes from somewhere deeper, from the silent intelligence that beats your heart, moves the tides, spins galaxies. You are moved by life, not the other way around. Let us then continue deeper, into the quiet place where the self relaxes its grip, where effort becomes play, where fear dissolves into trust, and where you rediscover the ancient truth, that life, when allowed, lives itself through you. There is a peculiar moment, subtle, almost unnoticeable, when effort transforms into struggle. It happens the instant we decide that what is happening should not be happening, that the universe has somehow made a mistake, that life ought to obey our private script. And from that moment onward, everything becomes heavier. The body stiffens, the breath shortens, the mind tightens like a fist. We begin to resist life, as though life were an enemy or a stubborn child refusing to behave. Yet the universe has never once failed at being itself. Only we fail at letting it be. You see, the drama of human suffering is almost entirely self-authored. Not consciously, not deliberately, but through ignorance of our own nature. We believe ourselves to be small captains navigating a vast and indifferent sea, responsible for steering every wave. But the sea does not need you to steer it. The sea carries you. It has always carried you. It will continue to carry you long after the idea of you fades like a dream upon waking. Imagine standing on the shore, watching waves roll in. Each wave arrives perfectly, not because someone planned it, but because it couldn't arrive any other way. And you too are a wave, a movement of the universe, unique, unrepeatable, but not separate, not self-created. Once you recognize this, something inside you unclenches. The sense of isolation softens. You realize that effortlessness isn't complacency, it's participation without the illusion of control. But of course, we cling to that illusion. We cling because we've been told since childhood that control is safety, that certainty is the foundation of happiness. Yet have you noticed that the moments when you felt most alive are the moments when certainty dissolved? The moment you fell in love, or the moment you stood at the edge of something unknown, or the moment you acted without thinking, simply moved by the current of life itself. These are the moments when effortlessness takes over, when the self gets out of the way. And this is why the art of effortless living is never learned, because you cannot learn what you already are. You can only remove the obstacles that obscure it, the obstacles of fear, of pretense, of clinging to an identity that was never meant to be permanent. Every identity you hold is like a costume worn for a particular scene in a play. The problem is not the costume. The problem is forgetting that you can take it off. When you cling to an identity, the achiever, the spiritual one, the strong one, the broken one, you limit the infinite ways in which life can express itself through you. You shrink yourself to fit the mask, and masks require effort. Masks require maintenance. Masks require you to remember who you're supposed to be at all times. What an exhausting project. Effortless living begins the moment you tire of the costume. The moment you allow yourself to be fluid, unpredictable, undefined. The moment you permit life to move through you as it wishes, not as you insist it should. Consider breath. If you try to control your breath, to perfect it, to force it into some ideal rhythm, you'll become tense. But when you forget the breath, when you allow it to breathe itself, it becomes smooth, deep, nourishing. Life is like this. It breathes you. You do not breathe life. And once you see this, once you feel it, you begin to trust the intelligence that moves through every cell of your body, every season, every storm, every joy. You begin to sense that life is not a problem to be solved, but a process to be experienced. A dance, not a duty. Now, dance is a beautiful analogy for effortless living, because dance reveals the paradox at the heart of all existence. Freedom arises not from control, but from relationship. A dancer does not move in isolation. They move with the music, with the floor, with gravity, with the partner before them. They surrender to these forces, and in that surrender, they discover a deeper kind of freedom. A freedom that is responsive, alive, intimately connected to the world. You are already dancing with life, whether you know it or not. Every thought, every sensation, every desire, every fear, they are steps in the choreography. When you cling to one step and refuse the next, you stumble. When you insist on leading, you become stiff. But when you allow the dance to unfold, when you let the music move you, a grace emerges that cannot be manufactured. This grace is effortless living. Not inaction, not apathy, not laziness, but harmony. A movement without friction. A willingness to be exactly where you are, doing exactly what you're doing, without adding unnecessary commentary in your mind. But the mind, bless it, loves commentary. It narrates constantly. You're doing it wrong. You should be further along. You should be different than you are. And the moment you believe this commentary, you step out of the dance. You lose the rhythm. So effortless living is, in a sense, learning to hear the commentary without obeying it. Seeing the mind's chatter the way you would watch clouds drifting across the sky, present but not binding. The mind can offer thoughts, but you do not need to bow to them. The mind can create stories, but you do not need to live inside them. When you stop believing every thought, an incredible spaciousness opens within you. Suddenly, there is room to breathe, room to feel, room simply to be. The noise quiets naturally, not because you forced it to, but because you stopped feeding it with your attention. And in that quiet, something subtle begins to emerge, a feeling of lightness, a sense that life is not nearly as heavy as you've been carrying it. You realize that much of your suffering was optional, self-imposed, created by your resistance to the flow. Let me give you another image. Imagine placing a leaf gently in a stream. You don't need to teach the leaf how to float. You don't need to instruct it on navigation. You don't need to encourage it to trust the water. The leaf floats because it cannot do otherwise. It is part of the stream. It belongs. Effortless living is realizing that you too are a leaf in the great stream of existence. Not separate from it, not superior to it, not lost within it, simply part of the flow. And once this is understood, not intellectually but viscerally, everything changes. Your movements become softer, your emotions become less threatening, your decisions become clearer, not because you strain to make the right choice, but because the next step reveals itself naturally, the way a path appears when the fog lifts. In the next movement of this meditation, let us explore how this effortless way of being transforms our relationships, our creativity, our sense of purpose, and why surrender is not the opposite of freedom, but the very doorway into it. You see, one of the most surprising places where effortless living reveals its wisdom is in our relationships, those delicate, unpredictable, endlessly shifting encounters with other human beings. We often imagine relationships to be complex because people are complex, but that is quite true. What makes relationships difficult is not complexity but control, the subtle, often unconscious attempts we make to shape others into the versions of themselves that support the story we're telling about who we are. And so we grasp, we cling, not always with our hands but with our expectations, our fears, our demands. We say, be this way so I can feel secure, behave like this so my world remains predictable, don't change because your change might require mine. Yet no relationship can thrive in the tight grip of expectation. You cannot love a person by holding them still any more than you can appreciate the wind by trapping it in a jar. The moment you cling, the moment you insist, the moment you try to control the unfolding of another person's becoming, the relationship begins to suffocate. Effortless living, then, offers a radically different approach, to meet others as you meet the sky, with openness, to allow people the freedom to be who they are, even when that challenges who you think you should be, to love not by possession, not by management, but by presence. When you let go of the need to shape others, something remarkable happens. You begin to see them, truly see them, not through the filter of your desires or fears, but as expressions of the same life that breathes through you. And in that seeing, compassion arises naturally. Compassion is not learned, it blooms the moment resistance dissolves. But we fear this openness, don't we? We fear that if we let others be free, we will be forgotten, abandoned, unloved. We fear that loosened hands mean broken bonds, yet the opposite is true. The less you cling, the deeper the connection becomes. Because what is shared is no longer a contract secured by fear, but a living dance between two beings who trust the rhythm of life more than their own anxious grasping. Just as the river carries you when you stop struggling, relationships flow with ease when you stop trying to choreograph the dance. Now, effortless living also transforms our creativity, whether that creativity expresses itself in painting, writing, solving problems, or simply living with imagination. You cannot force creativity any more than you can force a flower to bloom. You can pull at the petals, yes, but all you will create is ruin. Creativity belongs to the effortless dimension of life. It arises when the mind relaxes, when the grip of self-concern loosens, when trying dissolves into open play. Have you ever noticed that your best ideas arrive when you aren't looking for them? In the shower, on a walk, while staring at the ceiling, they emerge the moment the mind stops interfering, because creativity is not produced by the mind, it flows through the mind from a deeper source. You do not invent creativity, you receive it. And this receiving becomes a joy when you stop pressuring yourself to be original, brilliant, productive. Pressure blocks the channel, ease opens it. When you live effortlessly, creativity becomes a constant companion, a playful whisper arising from the silence within. You begin to discover that you are never truly out of ideas, you were simply too busy thinking to hear them. This brings us to purpose. another great burden people carry with immense seriousness. We treat purpose as a mission, a quest, a grand narrative we must decipher before we're allowed to feel at peace. And so we wander through life anxiously searching for our purpose, as though it were a secret document hidden in some cosmic archive. But purpose is not something you find. Purpose is something that reveals itself when you stop looking. Imagine standing in a forest, demanding that the trees explain their purpose to you. They would rustle gently, sway in the breeze, and say nothing, because their purpose is not contained in words. Their purpose is to be what they are, and in being what they are, they contribute to the great, mysterious harmony of existence. Your purpose is not different. When you relax into yourself, when you stop striving to become someone special, when you stop demanding that life give you a grand mission, something quiet, simple, and utterly profound begins to emerge. You begin to act in alignment with your nature, just as the tree grows, the bird sings, the stream flows. Your purpose is revealed through your being, not your searching. You see, purpose is not an achievement, it is an expression. And that expression unfolds effortlessly when you stop trying to perfect the storyline of your life. Now, many people worry that if they live effortlessly, they'll become passive or irresponsible, that their lives will collapse into chaos. But look closely and you'll see that chaos comes from resistance, not ease. Have you ever tried to hold too tightly to a rope while being pulled? Your hands burn, your muscles strain, and eventually you let go not because you wanted to, but because you had no choice. Effortless living invites you to loosen your grip before the rope burns. It asks you to live in harmony with the rhythms of existence, not in perpetual war against them. This does not make you a passive observer. When a moment calls for action, effortless living responds, swiftly, precisely, without hesitation. Because action not clouded by fear is clear. Action not driven by ego is effective. Action not weighed down by inner conflict feels light, graceful, almost magical. Have you ever had a moment where you acted without thinking, perhaps caught a falling object, comforted someone instinctively, solved a problem without analysis, and afterward wondered, how did I do that? That was effortless action, not passive, not hesitant, but free of the burden of self. And this is perhaps the deepest secret of effortless living. You act best when you forget yourself. When you stop watching yourself live and allow yourself to simply live. The self, when constantly observed, becomes clumsy. Have you ever become suddenly aware of your own walking and found your steps awkward? The same happens when we become too aware of ourselves. We lose the fluidity that comes when life acts through us rather than being managed by us. So effortless living is not the abandonment of action, it is the abandonment of self-consciousness in action. It is participation without the heavy burden of I must do this, or I must succeed, or I must impress. Instead, there is a quiet, joyful, intimate collaboration with the moment. Let us now journey into the final movement, into the heart of this effortless way, where surrender reveals its true nature, where freedom and ease become indistinguishable, and where life, at last, begins to live itself through you with a grace beyond your imagining. There comes a moment, if you listen closely to the rhythm of your own being, when you begin to sense that life is not something happening to you, but something happening as you. And in that moment, the very notion of effort becomes strangely unnecessary, like using a lantern to see the sun. You realize that the force you once called, your will, is only a tiny ripple on the surface of a vast and ancient tide. And the more you struggle to command that tide, the more exhausted you become. But when you surrender to it, when you become the tide, you discover a freedom so simple, so immediate, that it almost seems like cheating. This surrender is the heart of effortless living. But surrender is a misunderstood word. People imagine it as bowing one's head, giving up, letting circumstances bully them into submission. But true surrender is not defeat. It is the profound realization that there was never a battle to begin with. It is the moment when the drop remembers it is the ocean. When you stop insisting that life conform to your desires, your fears, your narratives, a great clarity enters the mind. It's like wiping condensation from a window. The world was always there, but now you can see it. And in that seeing, action becomes natural, unforced, and precise. You do what needs to be done without the weight of I must dragging behind every step. It's as though life begins doing itself through you, gracefully, silently, without applause or resistance. Think of the birds that migrate thousands of miles without a compass, or the trees that know precisely when to shed their leaves, or the waves that never tire of rising and falling. They are not following instructions. They are not struggling to get it right. They are simply participating in the grand intelligence of existence, an intelligence that moves through you as surely as it moves through them. The only difference is that you have learned to doubt it. This doubt, the suspicion that life cannot be trusted, that you must interfere, that you must be the architect of every outcome, is what separates you from the effortless grace you long for. You believe yourself to be the thinker of your thoughts, the origin of your actions, the author of your fate. But look closely. Thoughts arise without your permission. Emotions swell and fade like weather. Decisions appear in consciousness before you even know you've made them. The doer is imagined, the doing is real. To live effortlessly is to align with the doing and let go of the imagined doer. This may sound abstract, but its effects are entirely practical. When you let go of the inner commentator, the one who constantly reviews, criticizes, anticipates, you begin to live with a kind of quiet precision. You respond to situations without being tangled in them. You move through challenges without being heavy with them. The mind becomes lighter, clearer, more spacious. And in that spaciousness, life flows unobstructed. But let us be honest, this surrender can feel frightening at first. We cling to control the way a frightened child clings to a security blanket. But control is only comforting because we have forgotten how strong the current truly is. The river carries you whether you cling or not. The only question is whether you travel bruised and aching from clinging to rocks, or whether you allow the water to hold you effortlessly. Imagine the moment you finally stop struggling, not out of defeat but out of recognition. Imagine the relief that floods the body when you release the illusion that you must manage everything. Suddenly, the shoulders drop, the breath deepens, the mind loosens its grip, and in that instant, you realize that the universe is not a burden to carry, it is a dance to join. Effortless living is the beginning of that dance. But this ease does not mean that life becomes problem-free. Problems will still appear, of course, but they will no longer appear as enemies. A problem is simply a movement in the dance, a change in tempo, a shift in rhythm. When you stop resisting it, the problem becomes part of the choreography. You step with it, not against it. You improvise, you adapt, you listen. And listening, true listening, is effortless. It arises naturally when the mind is quiet. Not silent but quiet, not empty but uncluttered. The mind becomes like a clear lake that reflects the sky without distortion. And from that clarity, wisdom arises not as a thought but as a knowing, an intuition, a gentle pull toward the next movement. This is why great masters, artists, athletes, and lovers often describe a similar experience, moments when they get out of their own way, when everything becomes fluid, spontaneous, alive. They are not using effort, they are using presence. They are not controlling, they are allowing. They are not performing, they are participating. This is the secret you've known all along without realizing it. When you stop trying to live, life begins living through you. And what a relief it is when the burden lifts, when you no longer feel the need to prove yourself, justify yourself, improve yourself endlessly. You begin to trust your own nature, just as the tree trusts its roots and the wind trusts its direction. You begin to live not from fear, but from curiosity. Not from tension, but from awareness. Not from effort, but from being. Now you might ask, what does this look like in everyday life? It looks like simplicity. It looks like taking the next step without needing to see the entire staircase. It looks like doing what feels deeply aligned instead of what impresses others. It looks like saying yes when the heart opens, and no when it closes, without guilt, without explanation. It looks like living as though life is not a task, but a gift. And perhaps the greatest revelation of all is this. Effortless living is not something you achieve. It is something that remains when the achiever falls away. It is your natural state, uncovered. It is what is left when the noise quiets. When the grasping loosens. When the seeking ends. When the self relaxes into the warm, endless embrace of the present moment. And in that moment, life whispers the truth you always suspected, but never dared to fully believe. You were never meant to struggle your way through existence. You were meant to flow. Let us continue into the final movement, where we explore the dissolution of the self that strains, the recognition of the consciousness beneath it, and the final unveiling of effortless living as the most intimate expression of who you have always been. And now we come to the quiet center of the whole matter, the heart of the art that can never be learned, because it is the essence of what you already are. For all your life, you have believed yourself to be the one steering the wheel, the one making things happen, the one pushing the great machinery of existence forward. But look deeply, just for a moment, and ask yourself, who is this I that struggles so much? Where is it? What is it made of? And who is the one aware of this I at all? The more closely you examine the one who strains, the one who burdens itself with endless responsibility, the one who tries to manage the universe, the more it evaporates like mist in the morning sun, because the I you defend so fiercely is not a fixed thing. It is a story, a bundle of habits, memories, fears, and hopes, woven so tightly that you mistake the tapestry for the weaver. Effortless living becomes possible the moment you see that there is no separate self who must achieve it. The self that strains is a phantom. The self that clings is a ripple pretending to be the whole ocean. The self that fears letting go is a shadow frightened of its own non-existence. But behind that shadow, behind the narrative, behind the shifting mask of personality, there is awareness. Silent, open, luminous. It does not strain. It does not cling. It does not resist. It simply is, and in its being, everything finds its natural place. This awareness is the effortless core of your being. It cannot be improved, corrected, instructed, or perfected. It is untouched by your failures, unmarred by your efforts, unburdened by your past. It is the same awareness that looked out of your eyes when you were a small child, marveling at the world without naming it. It is the same awareness present when you listen to a piece of music that moves you, when you stand before a sunset, when you fall in love, when you awaken in the middle of the night to a profound and inexplicable sense of stillness. Awareness is effortless because it does not do anything. It simply shines. And once you recognize yourself as this awareness, not as the anxious puppet jerked around by thought, the entire project of self-improvement collapses, not in despair but in liberation, because you realize the one who needed improvement never existed, the one who was struggling was a misunderstanding. This is why the art of effortless living is never learned. Learning is something the mind does, and the mind is the very thing that complicates life. Effortless living arises when the mind relaxes, when it stops trying to control, interpret, and dominate experience. It arises when awareness takes its natural place as the ground of your being. But awareness is not distant. It is not aloof, sitting on a mountaintop observing life like a detached sage. No, awareness is intimately entwined with every movement, every breath, every sensation, every emotion. It is the silent partner in all your experiences. And when you rest as this awareness, life becomes astonishingly simple. You no longer need to force yourself to be calm. Calmness emerges from the stillness that was always there. You no longer need to strive for clarity. Clarity shines naturally when the dust of thought settles. You no longer need to prove yourself. The one who needed proof was only a story. And as this shift deepens, you begin to see that life is not separate from you at all. You are life. You are the blossoming flower, the flowing river, the changing seasons. You are the laughter of a friend and the tears you shed alone. You are the distant stars and the beating of your own heart. There is no boundary except the one thought constructs. To live effortlessly is to live as though this were true, because it is. It means you stop holding yourself at arm's length, analyzing life instead of participating in it. It means you stop treating yourself as a problem to be solved. It means you allow yourself to be what you are, without apology, without resistance, without the exhausting burden of needing to become someone else. And here is the great paradox. When you stop trying to change yourself, real transformation begins. Not by force but by alignment. Not by effort but by resonance. Not by will but by understanding. A tree does not try to grow, it grows because that is its nature. A river does not try to flow, it flows because flowing is what water does. And you, when freed from the tight grip of the mind, live effortlessly because effortlessness is the nature of life itself. There is a profound peace in this realization, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, a peace that does not come and go with moods or achievements. It is the peace of being aligned with reality, the peace of not fighting the world or yourself, the peace of resting in the truth that you are not separate from anything you experience. Effortless living is not the absence of challenge. It is the absence of unnecessary struggle. It is meeting each moment, not with resistance, but with openness. It is letting life move you, trusting that the intelligence that grew your bones and shaped the galaxies knows exactly what it's doing. And when you live in this way, lightly, openly, intimately, something extraordinary happens. Life begins to reveal its generosity, not through miracles or dramatic events, but through the subtle, constant grace of being aligned with what is. You begin to sense that everything, even the difficult moments, carries a certain wisdom. You begin to feel that you are not alone, not because someone is watching over you, but because you belong. You belong to this moment, to this breath, to this vast and ancient unfolding. And in this belonging, you find the effortless flow you have been seeking all along. So let yourself relax, let yourself soften, let yourself remember the simple truth. Living is not something you must learn. It is something you allow. Something you trust. Something you are. And when all resistance dissolves, when all striving falls away, when the mind grows quiet and the heart grows spacious. Life whispers its final, gentle secret. You are already what you are trying to become. Let that be enough. Let that be everything.